Hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth video of our invoicing series by Steltix. Today we have Mark Stockwell, the Executive Director of Invoicing at the Australian Taxation Office, with our very own Daniel Smith to discuss invoicing. As part of the ATO's initiative Invoicing Week 2022, Daniel and Mark will discuss invoicing and the ATO's role as the Peppol Authority on behalf of the Australian Government.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Steltix eInvoicing series. Today it's my great pleasure to welcome Mark Stockwell, Executive Director at the Australian Taxation Office, ATO. Welcome Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks Dan, really is a pleasure here, talking about my favourite subject of e-invoicing.
So on that Mark, briefly for those listening, what is e-invoicing?
Good place to start, Dan. I hear a lot of people ask that exact question, and it's important we actually clarify what e-invoicing is, because there is confusion and preconceptions about what, from business, what is e-invoicing and what is it about. People often think about it in terms of electronic data interchange, or EDI, as people refer to it as. Emailing PDFs is a common thinking that people have, or even sometimes they use their software to create the PDF itself before they email it. So they're all things that people think of when you say that word e-invoicing. But for us, it's a little bit different. So we're not referring to when people use PDFs being transmitted via an email, or even when you're dealing with your EDI system. E-invoicing is the new standardised way to exchange invoice data between two parties, the buyer and the supplier's software, irrespective of which software they're using. And the interoperability is the key to that. And so you're differentiating between this open standard and those that might be using an EDI closed standard. We're talking about machine-to-machine data exchange. And there's no need for OCRing, manual intervention that you see in everyday traditional invoicing today.
Thanks, Mark. Understood. That's a good intro. Can you tell us a little bit more detail about how it works?
Sure. So what makes invoicing possible is an international framework. You might have heard the word Peppol, that's what it's colloquially called as, so the Peppol framework. And what this includes is the specifications, of course, for the software that standardises the data for the invoice. It provides a secure delivery network that operates. It also is supported by a collection of legal agreements. So everyone is bound by contracts as to provide certainty about how they participate in the network. So once you're connected to that network, it doesn't matter which software you're using, nor does it matter what your trading partners use. As long as you're both connected to the network, you'll be able to trade and see the benefits of e-invoicing. I like to also give some analogies of how it might work. So the most common one I use is about the mobile phone system. So if you think about today, you want to send a text message between yourself and your colleague. So you'll have a mobile phone, and it could be an iPhone, could be a Samsung, doesn't really matter. You're using one of the network providers, it might be a Telstra and Optus. And likewise, your business partner also has a phone, doesn't really matter what they're having, and they have a provider. So what happens is today you're very used to texting off a quick text through your phone, and that's seamlessly received by your business partner. Now, this is no different what e-invoicing is about. It's actually having that seamless exchange of data between you and your partner, and agnostic of what phone you're actually using. In the industry, it's referred to as a four-corner model. So if you count to 1 to 4, it's corner 1 is your sending. So you're at corner 1, you're connected by your service provider at corner 2, and they then pass it through the network to the colleague's provider at corner 3, and they then route that onto your colleague's phone at corner 4. So it goes through the full four-corner model. And Peppol framework is exactly the same as this. Those connection points to the network, we refer to them as access points. And what they're doing is actually taking your information and passing it accurately and securely through the network to your trading partner. Now, it's helpful also to note that while we refer to it as e-invoicing, the standard actually accommodates the full end-to-end procurement suite. So not just the invoice, but includes things like a catalogue, catalogue response, punch out, purchase order responses, dispatch notices, different response notices. So you see the full suite of Peppol documents are there. But right now we started off with the invoice because it is the most common document and the one we see most dominant in the market.
Thank you, Mark. That's very clear. So, Mark, can you help us understand what are the drivers for e-invoicing here in Australia?
Well, for us, there were two main drivers in Australia. The first one was to create an open market, which enabled all businesses to take part in digital trading. And it removed some of the existing inefficiencies or barriers that they told us about. And this was particularly evident for small business. As you know, many businesses are doing it quite tough post-COVID. And so we're looking at ways that we could grow the digitisation of business. And e-invoicing was one of those real practical areas that we could see would make a difference for small business and help them transform and realise the benefits of digitisation. So large business, well, they've been using things like EDI for probably 30 years. And so they're used to that digitisation. And they use a range of EDI standards to exchange their trading documents. Often these buyer-dominated networks impose their preferred standard to their suppliers, often being small business, or they use large trading service providers who have come to some degree domination of the market. What it means, though, is that our small business suppliers who want to deal with all these networks as part of their business have to bear the cost of supporting several different standards when they're dealing with it and the inefficiencies that go with that. So it is a bit weighted towards the large end of town. So implementing an agreed common standard eases or bridges across that trading network. So an open invoicing network doesn't replace what those EDI solutions are, but they're complementary to that. And so what they provide is interoperability bridges, if you want to use that term, that use the same standards or communication protocols. So it's reducing the number of networks that a small business has to deal with and makes their life a lot less complex and more efficient. The second main driver was about reducing the cost to do with accounts payable, accounts receivable, and particularly doing away with the manual accounts payable processing that they deal with. So invoices produced as paper or PDF are typically processed through a manual process. And this requires accounts payable teams or staff to manage that by hand. You're talking about filing paper documents, manual data entry, matching line items, reconciling between the purchase order and the invoice. And it's a costly, labour-intensive task that has to be performed. So we asked Deloitte Access Economics back in 2016 to do a study for us. And what that told us back then, so data's getting a bit aged in terms of 1.2 billion invoices flowing through the Australian economy on an annual basis. So it's probably a little bit higher these days. But what hasn't changed is the average cost of processing of an invoice. So we knew from that study it's about $30 or $27 on a PDF on average to send an invoice through the network. When you compare that to about $9 for a digitised e-invoice, you're talking a fairly significant payoff on average when you consider all the costs that go into working with your trading partner. So invoicing is about supporting business to be more efficient. Hopefully through that, they will see faster payments, which obviously then will improve cash flow for business. What that helps build, though, is greater relationships between the trading partners, and most importantly, it's boosting the productivity in the economy.
Thanks, Mark. I suppose one comment, I'm not seeing the link between tax and compliance. Is that right? And what is the role of the ATO in this initiative?
Very astute. That's exactly right. So how it's been set up here in Australia is like most jurisdictions or most countries around the world. So what each country has is a Peppol authority, and effectively that's the role that the ATO here in Australia plays. So we're referred to as the Peppol Authority, and with that we had legislation to support that. And what we do is we administer the authority on behalf of the government. And what we do is we try to help businesses take advantage of the benefits of the invoicing and to grow our digital economy. So some of the things we do as the authority is, firstly, we had to define what the specifications were for our standard here in Australia. And of course, that's making sure we've got a valid GST tax invoice flowing through the network. Secondly, what we call a credit. all the access points I spoke about before to make sure that they're fit for purpose, secure, and builds confidence for the business community that are using those access points to support them in the trade. Thirdly, we look at education, promoting and supporting the adoption of the Peppol standard throughout the network, and a little bit of what we're doing here today. Yep. We also work with the digital service providers and business community, ensure that the framework is suitable and is implemented broadly across Australia. Now, that legislation I spoke of before to give us the role of the authority is limited in terms of what we could do. So it gave us those 4 main points, but what it doesn't give us is any access to information on those invoices that flow through the network. So we're developing a full solution for the community to derive the benefits of e-invoicing. We've been working closely with lots of the large business. No, it's not always about the small business and the supply chain for big business. We're also dealing with large business as well. And they're seeing the advantages of having that alternative channel to the existing EDI solution that they have, and looking at how they can actually grow the efficiency benefits of their accounts payable and accounts receivable areas.
So, Mark, do you mind giving us a bit of an update on what government agencies are doing in this space?
That's one of the early success stories, Dan. So in the federal government space, since 1 July, all non-corporate Commonwealth entities, they operate under a mandate for government. And what that means is they're now able to receive e-invoices from their supply chain. So all suppliers to federal non-corporate agencies, which is about 100 agencies in total, all are e-invoicing enabled. Additionally, what the government did, not only mandating those agencies, but also as part of the government's pay on time or pay interest policy, what this means is that these agencies also will then pay the suppliers in 5 days if they receive an e-invoice. So there's a great incentive there for our supply chain to not only get the efficiency from e-invoicing, but then also receive a payment in 5 days. So I think that's fantastic success. We've kicked that off and starting to see some of those suppliers receiving that payments already. In the state and territory area, also there's some success now happening in that space. They don't have the same mandate, but we're seeing in the New South Wales and South Australian states, about 150 agencies are now enabled to receive e-invoices, which is fantastic. But we're also seeing some of the other states now in different phases through piloting or exploring their business case at the moment. So over the next while, you'll start to see more and more of the states come on board. And similarly with the local government, I think it's about 4 we have enabled, the early adopters, but again, we've got lots of local councils at various stages of getting ready to support their local supply chain. Now, as we know, the question was about what's in it for me. So automation probably is the main differentiator. We speak about the manual process. We're now moving into automation and what digitisation gives you. And e-invoicing is part of that process. I mentioned earlier how costly and sometimes outdated manual accounts processing can be. So a switch to invoicing then will remove some of that manual data management that you have to do. And the intervention that we see when people have to go back and correct or reconcile some of that inaccurate data. So invoicing reduces that overhead and that burden. And ultimately also it speeds up what we call that financial closure, or later on when you're doing auditing and things like that, the record keeping benefits there expedite some of that auditing process. Another major feature of what's in for business is about trying to reduce late payments. So that's something we heard in our early research that Australia hasn't always been the greatest payer. And so for reducing late payments as a consequence of manual processing is something we want to overcome. One other potential benefit for business or for large business is ability to more easily comply with a range of regulations, such as the payment times reporting scheme that now large business is subject to. So invoicing can help with those data requirements, particularly in determining when the clock starts on those payment times, so you get the accurate measure. It also helps you through when you're dealing with the tax office in our justified trust processes, when you're doing audits and things like that. The record keeping features and the certainty that invoicing gives you certainly contributes to improvements in that area. So overall, when you think about all those different factors, it's a very positive contributor to that relationship between the buyer and their supply chain. It can lead to faster payments, it's better governance, and overall, I would say it's good corporate citizenship that's actually contributing to the economy.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So it sounds like there's a lot in it for everyone. Everyone that's part of the end-to-end process. So I suppose following on from that, what are the benefits within your trading networks as well? Can you help elaborate on that?
Yeah, look, large business would know that, I won't say a large number, but small business suppliers often are put off by transacting with large businesses whose systems or procedures are to some degree complicated. And they can be expensive and time-consuming for the business supplier, and so that's a bit off-putting. And look, EDI solutions have helped reduce the processing cost for the buyers. There's no question about that. Unfortunately, though, in some cases, it's resulted in some cost and burden being passed on to the small business supplier by having to deal with multiple different standards and trading differently with each of their buyers across a range of different networks. So what Peppol Invoicing helps do is remove that barrier and potentially gives large business more small businesses who are willing to deal with them on a supply needs. And what this is probably doing is reinforcing that buy local message. So having more suppliers to choose from, obviously that can improve the quality and cost for yourselves, and that's good for business. For large buyers, the international standard also makes it easier to onboard new trading partners with relatively modest establishment costs. From what we see from the traditional way of onboarding costs, we're seeing that principle of connect once and trade with many, very true about the e-invoicing. So e-invoicing for me, it offers the best of both worlds. So large buyers can continue to capitalise upon their existing investment in EDI, and while then small suppliers then have much simpler one-time connection method to trade across all those networks. So it becomes a bit of win-win for all the participants. E-invoicing also helps improve the experience for small suppliers overall, because it's making it easier for them and how they deal with their accounts payable systems for earlier payments, as well as providing the visibility for suppliers over their invoice status through use of response messaging. Now they'll be able to know when the invoice has been accepted or rejected or even paid. And what that does is gives them confidence, but also minimises them needing to contact large suppliers to check in the status of that invoice.
Yeah, understood, Mark. That makes a lot of sense and certainly appreciate that. So moving on to a question which is very topical for our Steltix customers. We deal with a lot of organisations supplying services to government, but what are the benefits for organisations that are doing exactly that, supplying goods and services to government agencies?
Sure. I mentioned before about the 5-day payments terms for business, as I talked about, as a great incentive. Under that policy, prior to 1 July, there used to be a $1 million cap for the contracts whereas we've actually removed that at 1 July this year, 2022. And what that means now is that all our supply chain can take advantage of sending us an e-invoice and able to then receive payments in 5 calendar days. So again, it's a incentive not only for small business, but for large business alike.
And that's just to clarify, that's regardless of the value. So if you've got a large contract with government which exceeds $1 million, then that's eligible for that 5-day payment terms.
That's exactly right. So yeah, there is in the policies arrangements, you need to make sure that the agency is aware that you're sending the invoice through, so they can ready for that and things like that. But yeah, we're removing that exception to the policy.
Fantastic. Okay.
And beyond that, I mean, improved cash flow is potentially a big benefit. Doesn't matter if you're small or large. Yeah, cash flow is cash flow. And because you're not making or not seeing any mistakes happen between the two parties, in whether they're creating or paying their invoice, these sort of errors, missing information, lost invoices, and ultimately takes us time and effort to actually deal with the fairly laborious process. So taking that away, you're actually seeing a much faster way of dealing with those payments. also reference back to a report just done 2017. It was the US Business Payments Coalition. They were doing some early research around e-invoicing, and what they found in that modelling they'd done is about 92% of invoices were approved and paid on time when they received an invoice, compared to about 45% that were processed in a manual way. So what we're contributing that to is making online payments will reduce the payment terms, and that's a big focus for government and how that e-invoicing will assist with bringing down those times.
So thanks, Mark. In summary, lots of benefits, and also the removal of that, I suppose, eligibility criteria, which has only just kicked in, is huge. So thank you for that.
Yeah, about those misconceptions. I mentioned earlier that invoicing is not about emailing PDFs or using the EDI network. So what we found, though, is people still think about software to generate an invoice or using your EDI or sending the PDF via email is what we mean when we say e-invoicing. So we need to correct that misconception, clarify how it's different from just your basic electronic invoicing, so that people know that they'll need to take action, do something different in order to be part of this network and know how it will actually benefit from that. We found that small business who have started to use e-invoicing immediately understood the difference and saw the significant benefits, and were very positive about their experience once they'd actually stepped themselves through that. So we just need to get more of those early adopters and their trading partners aware of what e-invoicing is, and I'm sure over time we'll see the benefits will actually be understood at scale. We've also partnered with lots of different stakeholders to raise the awareness more at the grassroots level. And one of those initiatives we're calling out is e-invoicing week, which is in middle of August, the 15th to the 21st, I think the dates were. So I'm hoping that you might be able to attend some of those events. Essentially what we're asking everyone is from the early adopters or software providers, business advisors, tax professionals, all the people that are involved in the business community to come along, tell their story, encourage their networks to participate and get on board and raise that awareness of what e-invoicing is, and educating what is the real true benefits, removing those myths that we spoke about. So we've got hundreds of webinars, emails, social media posts all lined up already. So we're getting good engagement from participants already. So we're looking forward to everyone getting on board for e-invoicing week very shortly. Earlier, I also mentioned about how this invoice standard is a global invoice standard, international standard, and also mentioned how we partnered with New Zealand as part of our Trans-Tasman initiative. But also want to call out, look, it's just not us in New Zealand. Also close to home, we've got neighbours of Singapore and Japan who are also in the same network. And so if you've got trading partnerships in Singapore, Japan, and a couple of in the Asia Pacific area, also they'll be able to benefit from e-invoicing with yourselves.
So Mark, I suppose a little bit more detail if you don't mind, because one of the common questions I field is, and it goes back to some of the areas we've already touched on, what is the difference between EDI and Peppol? Some organisations have a high level of familiarity and understand EDI, yet Peppol is a bit foreign to them. So can you just explain the differences between the two protocols? Sure.
Look, EDI is a broad term, and it refers to any electronic data exchange between computer systems of different businesses using often common proprietary or industry-specific data standards. Maybe people are familiar, particularly if you're a small business, where you log into a different portal with your details and enter your details through that portal. So EDI is quite often highly customised to meet the unique needs of the specific business or the trading network to facilitate point-to-point document or data exchange. So what this typically leads to, though, is closed proprietary data standards and all platforms. And what happens is this makes these networks operate as islands of trade or closed trading networks. So e-invoicing in the Peppol framework is not a procurement platform or a software. Technically, it's a digital infrastructure. So it's using open data standards, data delivery rules, security standards. These are the features of the digital infrastructure referred to. So what this does is it helps then the business exchange the P2P documents or to cash data with other businesses through that framework. So the Peppol framework is used by businesses in more than 40 countries. Once a business connects to the network, they then can exchange the data with anyone else in that network. So they use the principle of connect once, connect to all.
Okay, understood. Thank you, Mark. You've also mentioned that e-invoicing is not used for tax compliance here in Australia, but that's not the case in some other countries, is it?
No, that you're right. There are other countries that do use invoicing for tax compliance reasons, and generally that's with some greater governance oversight by the country authority. But not often, but sometimes we've also seen they have a clearance model. So the transactions go through a government entity to actually have clearance on that invoice before they're actually then sent on to the intended recipient. But here in Australia and also in New Zealand, that's not the case. The government doesn't see anything except the details about how the network is functioning, like transaction volumes, for example. I know it can be a bit confronting, I suppose, dealing with the ATO, and the small businesses, especially when they hear the ATO is involved in this, they do wonder as to what is the role. So being very clear around our role and our limitations in our role as an authority, because quite often people make the general connection between the ATO and compliance. But when you look at where we are as a country, our GST compliance rate is fairly good here compared to many other countries. And so we don't see the need to have further regulatory or compliance initiatives to assist already a fairly strong GST economy. We've got a long history of developing and deploying countrywide technology projects like I've mentioned earlier. And we've also got that excellent network and relationships and track record of dealing with the different stakeholders in rolling out these initiatives fairly seamlessly. So it's important that for us to overcome that misconception and provide assurance and confidence to the participants in the network about the efficiencies that are there, but also that they're free to be worried about the ATO's involvement.
Okay, understood. Another thing you mentioned earlier, that e-invoicing for businesses here in Australia is voluntary, but I believe there has been some consultation about options for mandating this to some businesses. Can you give us a bit of a heads up as to what's going on there and what we can expect?
That's correct, Dan. So going back as early as January 2021, the Treasury Department did a consultation about mandatory adoption methods or concepts. They then followed up with a further consultation in February this year, where they tested a concept called a business e-invoicing right. What that was about essentially is it gave small business the power to actually demand an e-invoice from their customers. We don't know where that's up to. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, but we've had a election in between, so we're now just waiting for the outcomes from the Treasury consultation. There are details for those people particularly interested. There are details on the Treasury website of those consultations, but we're still waiting the outcomes from a government perspective on that consultation. But if you think of e-invoicing, as I outlined earlier, we think the benefits stand alone without needing a mandate involved here. The important thing is for business to understand what the invoicing first is and how it impacts you and what it means for your business. And then you can make a conscious judgment about what to do about that. So as I've mentioned before, it is a global standard, over 40 countries, been operating for several years. We've got countries close to home if you're using them as trading partners. So there's a lot of real positive story about why you should be looking at the benefits of invoicing and not waiting or worrying about a mandate. The government is committed to supporting e-invoicing. We're starting to reach that point of maturity, as I mentioned before, the network being established, the software is now here, people becoming aware of invoicing, and now as your trading partners become aware of it, you'll see more and more adoption. That'll be great news in terms of getting that economy-wide efficiency.
Thanks, Mark. Great answer. That helps clarify. Thank you. So, Mark, on to another question that we get asked a lot, particularly from the suppliers that we have that perform services for government agencies. Does e-invoicing provide an advantage to companies in the government tendering process?
What I'll say is that government, always award our contracts to the best tenderer overall. Increasingly, though, we're starting to see invoicing capability mentioned in the business tender documentation. So adopting invoicing obviously could make you more competitive and when you have to meet that requirement. I'd say the key thing, though, about here and about dealing with the government, obviously where they're paying through faster payments through the use of e-invoicing certainly is an incentive. But parties must honour the details of their supply contracts. And if there's no consideration for e-invoicing, that might mean missing out on a 5-day payment under the pay on time or pay interest policy. So that, again, that incentive is there for people to send us an e-invoice. So it's definitely, I think, in businesses' best interest to ensure invoicing is a choice or have that capability when they sign any supply contract with government buyers.
And I suppose following on from that, but what are the next steps for e-invoicing, generally speaking? What's the plan?
Okay, from here, like I said earlier, it's exciting time to be in part of the project. So we're doing as much as we can to support the government agencies with their operational implementation and the business process adaptations and supplier onboarding. What we're trying to do there is to normalise and make it and be more proactive, I suppose, and encourage invoicing throughout the government procurement and supply chains. We've also got work going on with the Department of Finance to apply a whole of government approach. What that includes is looking at a supplier onboarding working group. So that's to, again, share learnings through our government agencies about onboarding our supply chain and get the learning shared across the full network. From a business perspective, there's now a maturing ecosystem of software products and service providers available to allow businesses to start invoicing and start to attain those benefits and drive more value through their procure-to-pay and order-to-cash processes. As I said, there's 34 accredited access points to choose from. Out there, I know majority, if not all, ERP providers now have solutions and have established adoption pathways and options. And we also know the accounting packages have released their product to the market, often supporting your supply chain. So now is a really great time for every business to really seriously think about invoicing and when and how they should be enabled. So with business adoption, we're taking a more of a strategic sector-based approach. So we're targeting industries and suppliers to government that have high invoice volumes. But we're also looking at some of the diverse business sizes and software and trying to find where there's deep penetration across a particular business sector, such as, for example, a recruitment or retail industries. We're also working now with the utility sector. Now, that has very broad penetration, obviously, through every business in the country. And we're leveraging some of the regulatory initiatives like the Australian Energy Regulators Better Bills Guideline. And we've established a energy retailers working group to help us understand invoicing in that sector, but also about aiding invoicing adoption by members of that group and the broader utility sector that we'll learn from. We've been really pleased with the response from the business community overall, and we've been directly supported a number of early adopters to help us understand how this will work in practice, and then we'll be able to refine that approach and recommendations for adoption. So really pleased to announce some of those early adopters in the large sector, names like Bunnings, Woolworths. Most people would have heard of those two entities, and they're just the tip of the number of other large sector brand names that are actually doing implementations as we speak. And we're really looking forward to further announcements over the course of the e-invoicing week fairly shortly.
What advice would you give a business who are interested in implementing e-invoicing, and where should they start their journey if there's something that's new to them and they want to get on with the implementation or approach?
Sure. Look, stating the obvious to the group, I know, but I mean, each business is unique. So consideration for each business will subtly be different. But for small business, we're starting with them. Getting ready for e-invoicing is quite straightforward, quite easy, especially if you're using software already. You more than likely find that invoicing package is already enabled. So it's simply just checking in with your provider to see if it is enabled and stepping through the fairly straightforward steps to be registered into the system. And what then you're often running literally in a matter of minutes in some cases. For the medium to large sector, making invoicing a strategic priority and committing to it is probably the first step you need to think about. Invoicing is an additional efficient channel for you at your fingertips. So you also will need your clients and suppliers, obviously, to send and receive to get those benefits. And it might not be replacing your existing software and processes. It might be something just that is complementary to those processes, but what it's going to do is provide you with greater level of efficiency overall. For large businesses, obviously developing a business case is probably the first step by identifying, prioritising the invoicing initiative and the scope of that initiative so that you can then focus on sending invoices or receiving invoices or doing both. So, there's different parts of your business you'll need to consider when you develop your case. You also need to consider about your trading partners, and they may be using different documents or different processes. So again, taking that in consideration when you work out what's the best approach for you. And knowing those details will help you develop the most effective business case and grow with your business. Get and registered into the system's the next one. And there's a few different options for you. Obviously, you've got your existing software, if that's enabled, and talking to your providers there. You can actually engage with an e-invoicing service provider. You'll need to also choose an option which best fits with your business needs and your plan. So to get ready, you can check out the Invoicing Ready product register. It's on the ATO website, and find out about if your existing software is ready for invoicing. I know the Steltix Oracle JD Edwards is listed up there, but you'll just need to check in with your software provider and find out are they enabled now or in the future. Otherwise, talk to the service providers just to see what is available and what might be best for your business. The next step, I suppose, is then planning for that smooth transition or complementary channel being part of your business. So firstly, I would recommend people to review your processes. It's not just taking a paper process and digitizing that without making changes to those processes. You'll soon find that there are several different ways, more efficient ways of doing things. So it's understanding things like how many invoices you might send and receive, how often, is there a pattern to that you can actually work with, and how do you send those invoices or receive them, and what processes do you have in place that you need to review in dealing with those processes. For example, that reconciliation with the purchase order, it might be done automated in the new world. No longer do you need to do that manual step as you've always done. Try and identify what I'd call your top supplier and buyers, and generally that's by number of invoices, or could be in some cases by value, but identify those top buyers and suppliers, talk to them, see at what stage they're up to on their journey. They might be further advanced than what you think. And by understanding where they are, brings about streamlining the interaction and relationship you have with those suppliers, and therefore you're both going to benefit from the outcomes of e-invoicing. So understanding and managing those changes in your business process is important. And important, though, for your business, that you ensure that your communication, and that's not just with those supply chains I spoke about, but also your staff, so they are aware of how their work or their process may change as a result of e-invoicing, and therefore you're going to have a much easier transition as you go into implementation steps. Final step really is that onboarding. So what we also have learnt from the government space, which I think equally applies to large business, is about, as I said before, identifying those suppliers who are high volume, or another way of looking at it we've also found is where we've got high error rate invoices currently. So by attacking those very costly manual processes and automating that, actually gives you a win immediately. So that's another way of looking at those volumes. So it's understanding your business. So once you've got those trading partners on board, you're going to then do some testing. Again, we'd recommend you just test with a small group, work out and test not only the technical connections with them, but also how those back office processes are now operating, and tweaking them as you need, as you learn from this new way of doing business. So it's over time, then you'll work out a plan then to best transition your trade partners onto the new channel and derive the benefits from there. I'd also recommend people talking to their business advisors. We've been talking with them the last 6 to 12 months. about e-invoicing as an initiative, so that you should be able to get some advice from them as well.
Thanks, Mark. Some really practical ways to get started on the invoicing plan implementation approach. So thank you for that. Okay, Mark, if people are listening, watching this webinar and they'd like to know more information, is there a site that they can visit?
Certainly is. ATO.gov.au. If you put in /e-invoicing, just one word, there's a raft of information there for e-invoicing for all levels, whether you be small, large, government. There's a host of information there. I'd urge you to go to that site. And as I've said before in this section, talk to people, talk to your providers, talk to your supply chain, and through that conversation, you'll find out the best solutions for your business.
Oh, thanks, Mark. That's been very informative, and thank you for joining us as part of the Steltix e-invoicing series. Thanks to everyone listening. We look forward to joining us again soon. And again, thank you, Mark, from the ATO. Certainly a wealth of knowledge on the matter, and certainly appreciate you taking the time to help people understand this incredibly important initiative. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much, Dan.
Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you in the next one.